Welcome to another 21 Hats Dashboard, brought to you by our sponsor, The Great Game of Business. I'm Lauren Feldman, and I'm here with Gene Marks. Hello, Gene.
Hello, Lauren. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Not good. Not good.
Actually, you sound like your voice is a little bit off.
I lost my voice, and I'm still getting over the loss of the Phillies as well. I know it's behind and nobody cares, but it's just we're very. I'm going to try and find some energy.
I care, Gene. I care.
Yeah, you do. You do. So, but anyway, let's get to business.
All right. Gene, you wrote recently that it's illegal to fire an employee who refuses to come to the office and work. And it sounds like you're pretty outraged about it. Is that really the case?
Well, yes and no. Here's what's going on. The National Labor Relations Board has now, by the way, the National Labor Relations Board is a very, very pro-worker, pro-union agency of the government.
Well, it's designed to be that, right?
It is. So that's what it does. So it's never really going to be on the side of businesses for the most part. It was mostly dormant during the Trump administration, as you can imagine. And now during the Biden administration, it's fully staffed with Biden appointees, and they've been super active. And they've been making all sorts of helping unions with certain rules for them to unionize better and market themselves and all that kind of stuff. Well, anyway, now the board itself has decided to step into a little bit of a battle with Twitter or X and Elon Musk and employees working from home. And here's what the National Labor Relations Board, found. There was an employee who was told to come into the office to work.
It was all employees, right?
It was all employees. That's correct.
And it was I think it was done in a tweet. It was like, if you can physically make it into the office, come in. If not, we accept your resignation kind of thing, right?
Right. Now, I'm not going to defend the manner in which the policy is communicated.
I'm glad to hear that.
Because it is a little extreme, although it's kind of the kind of message I would love to give. But okay, he's Elon Musk. So some employees took umbrage with that. They did not, or one in particular did not want to come into the office. The employee enjoyed working from home. And so then the ultimate and that employee expressed their dissatisfaction publicly on social media because it's Twitter. So, they have the ability to do that. The employee was fired for not coming into the office. However, it wasn't the...
Wait. I'm not sure it's clear that she was fired for not coming into the office. I think what the NLRB said was that she was fired because...
For retaliation, right?
Well, but retaliation for... attempting to organize other workers and encouraging them not to resign and to make Musk actually fire them and to, mount opposition to this new policy.
And meanwhile, Musk's position is that, no, I said that we were going to, you either come into the office or, find a job elsewhere. And his position is that's why he fired them. But the NLRB believes that it could be otherwise. And what it does, Lauren, though, is that it does open the door. I mean, let's say you're running a business, right? And you're saying, look, our work from home policy is whatever. You got to be in the office 4 days a week, and you can work from home 1 day a week, which is, sounds reasonable. But say you've got an employee that does not want to comply with that policy. And you say to the employee that if, you don't come in, this is part of the job, we're going to terminate you. And if the employee complains about this publicly in any way, and then the employer terminates the employee, there's grounds for the NLRB to go after that employer and saying, oh, you terminated that employee because you retaliated against that person complaining about you publicly. It's a retaliatory action. And therefore, all you have to do if you're an employee, if you want to get around that kind of a rule, is just to complain about it publicly, because then you're safe. Because then if you get fired, it can be construed as retaliation, and it's a free, get out of jail card as it is. That's the issue. Does that make sense?
Well, except for one thing, the precedent that the NLRB seems to be setting here, it isn't just about complaining, though, is it? It's about organizing. Their words were specifically that it was retaliation for an attempt to organize her coworkers not to resign. So I don't think it's just complaining about it wouldn't necessarily be grounds, according to.
I think it's tomato and tomato. If an employee is either going to complain or even threaten to retaliate or to take action back, or any actions where the employee is expressing their dissatisfaction with the employer, and then the employer still goes ahead and fires the employee, any of those actions can be construed to be retaliatory, and therefore it puts the employer on the hook. And so, Musk is such a visible example of this. The NLRB is holding them out as an example. But I think, because of this, any business, big or small, could be subject to the same treatment that Musk got if an employee chooses not to comply with, a workplace rule and complains about it publicly, or like you said, says we're going to, I'm going to organize a protest among other employees. All they have to do is say that, and then it can be construed to be retaliatory if you still go ahead and fire that person.
I'm glad you said that what you said about how it might affect other businesses, because I'm much less interested in how it affects Twitter, X,
Elon
and Musk, and more interested in the ramifications of it. How do you square this with an at-will state where supposedly you can an employer can fire an employee for any reason?
I couldn't agree with you more. I'm not a labor attorney, so I'm not a legal expert on this, but I think the NLRB has got a very, very flimsy case. And, if Twitter or any employer, counter sues the NLRB for this, I think the NLRB is not going to have, much of a defense for this type of a rule. But I do say, Lauren, that it is, it's just indicative of sort of the environment that we're in right now. The NLRB right now feels so powerful and has such confidence in itself because it's been so fully backed by the administration that it's just saying, hey man, we're going to go after, even though, this kind of thing seems way out of their realm of jurisdiction. But they're still doing it.
I'm not sure I would agree with that, but I think there's some danger that we read too much into this. I mean, for example, it's very hard for me to imagine that this is going to affect somebody who runs a factory business, and there's a factory worker who says, you know what, I'm going to work from home from now on. I don't think that's going to fly, and I don't think the NLRB is going to help that person. Do you?
I don't know. All I do know is that if you have somebody in their office who wants to be working from home and doesn't want to comply with a new policy, even if it's at will, and that person publicly complains or publicly threatens to organize other employees and is still fired, I think that person, once they look at what the NLRB is doing with Twitter or X, can take that as a green light to sue. And whether or not that will prevail in court still doesn't mean it won't be a headache for the business owner, and a little bit of and frustrating.
Don't you think it also matters on what terms the employee was hired? I mean, I don't know the situation at Twitter, except that at a certain point, everybody at Twitter was allowed to work from home, and some employees moved to other parts of the country, and that was okay at the time, but before Musk owned it. Certainly Musk, once he owns it, has a right to set his own rules. But I would think that the terms of employment are a factor here as well. Shouldn't they be?
I guess. But again, like you just said, I mean, Musk is the owner of the business, can decide, how he wants his employees to work, and terms can be changed. So, I don't know the answer to that without seeing the terms of employment.
All right. Next topic. Let's talk about something else that I think has you outraged.
You're really right in there. First the Phillies lose, and now you just, you know what I mean? You're digging it in. That's what you're doing right now.
I'm going for it.
Yeah, here you go.
The EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, has a new proposed harassment rule.
Surprise, surprise. Right,
You start your column by writing, and the regulations on business keep coming.
Yep.
I see a pattern here.
Yep.
Does it matter if it's a good regulation or a bad regulation, or are you saying all regulations are bad?
No, of course, I'm not saying all regulations are bad.
It sounds a little bit like you're saying it.
There's just a lot of regulations, and some of them, might be, it's just another thing that we have to deal with. So let's talk about this workplace harassment rule, right? It's clarifying Section 7 of the 1965 Civil Rights Act. Okay. And
it is just a proposed rule at this point, right?
Yeah, but the public review period already ended last week, so it's expected to be finalized by the first quarter of 2024. It's moving forward. And what it's doing is it's making the business owner, and again, this regardless of size, it is making the business owner more responsible for the behavior of employees, both in and out of the office. So, there's a component that there's like 4 big components to this, just so we're aware, right? There's the LGBTQ plus component where, if an employee is being intentionally or repeatedly misgendered by other employees, and the business owner is either unaware of it or aware and not doing anything about it because, I don't know, we're busy running a business, that can be a reason for making a claim with the EEOC. And by the way, the EEOC now has stepped up on its website the ability for employees to file claims directly with the EEOC. So if an employee has an issue as an employer, you don't even know about it. Your employees can go directly to the EEOC and file claims against you now. And then you'll find out about it when you get a call from Washington. But okay, so there's the LGBTQ plus people. If you don't have gender neutral bathrooms, that could be considered to be a form of harassment. There's for women that are pregnancy or going through childbirth. If people are talking in the office about their, it literally says it's about their contraceptive choices or about abortion or non-abortion, and this person is offended or feels harassed by it. Again, that could be an employer liability. The same thing with virtual harassment. So if employees are on online meetings on Zoom and they're part of somebody says something sexist or racist or discriminatory, or they see books on a bookshelf behind one of the Zoom participants in their own home that might be on topics that offend them. Those kinds of things could be the responsibility of the employer, Lauren. And do you have
a problem with that?
Do you?
I think an employer does have some responsibility for those situations. I guess one of the things I wanted to ask you about specifically is you seem to draw the distinction between whether it happens in the workplace or some other setting. And you seem to think that that's silly or wrong from the way you worded it. If a manager harasses a subordinate in some other setting, it's still a work related issue, isn't it?
It is, but it really depends on the definition of harassment, and that definition is really being left up to the worker. I mean, I'll give an extreme example. Say I am on I'm on a Zoom call, a conference call, and I've got books behind me that are in Hebrew or, supporting, Israel. And there's somebody on the call that supports Palestine, and they're another employee and they see these books behind me and they're offended because, I'm supporting Israel, and we're on a company call from my home, and it just happens to be my bookshelf behind me. Even that, Lauren, could be, reason for that employee to say, I feel uncomfortable and harassed, and can make a claim, to the EEOC that my employer is either unaware of this, or they're not being aware of this, or they haven't checked, or they haven't done enough, and because of that, I'm filing a claim. And make no claims against this. That it was reported this week, the commissioner, one of the commissioners of the EEOC, was was testifying to Congress this week and literally said that a continued rise in lawsuits are a safe bet this year because the EEOC is, ready for action and to go after. I'm not saying that there aren't some of these cases that have, that are reasonable, but I think it's going to open the door to a lot of frivolous cases and a lot of bullshit that I think is going to waste employers' time and take them away from running their businesses. So, where do you draw the line and where do you stop? That's, that's where I'm at as a business owner.
So what do you recommend for business owners? What can they do to try to lessen the risk?
I'm glad you asked that. And, it's funny, when I speak to business groups, I don't say any of this stuff that I don't complain. Believe it or not, I really don't.
You save that for me?
Yeah, I save it for you. It's only for you that I sit there and vent, because we can do that on this podcast and that's fine. But when I speak to business owners, I lay out, okay, these are the things you need to know. What actions do you need to take? Well, you need to update all of your employee policies and your harassment policy in particular to make sure that they are in accordance with this new workplace harassment rules, which means you're going to have to spend some money and hire a labor attorney or an HR expert and go through your employment policy and make sure that you have zero tolerance for any of the, the stuff that's in this new workplace harassment rule. Zero tolerance. It's got to be in writing. That's number one. Number two, you need to revisit and then communicate your reporting procedures. So, the worst is that somebody feels that they've been harassed or they're uncomfortable at work or whatever, and there's not a system for reporting this to somebody, to somebody know about it. That's bad for the business owner and bad for the employees. So you have to revisit how employees can report these issues when they come up, because you don't want them going directly to the EEOC. And finally, more money, you're going to have to consider getting some training. Now, training on harassment is required in 7 states, California, Connecticut, Delaware, Illinois, Maine, New York, and Washington. So that's required in those states. But even if it's not required in your state, strongly recommend that once or twice a year, you bring in an HR consultant, pay them what they're going to pay them, and have them train your managers on how to identify and how to deal with any potential harassment issues now that this new rule has come out. That's what you do.
So while I might slightly disagree with your level of outrage, I think that's great advice. And I guess I would just point out that obviously you're right that there is a cost involved to this. And that cost is, the kind of training that you're talking about. And that cost is also, without doubt, the potential for frivolous claims that have to be dealt with. But the converse is also true. If there weren't these regulations, if the owners didn't take these steps, there's a potential cost as well. And that cost is of losing good employees who feel, as if they're not being treated well because they're subject to situations that they really shouldn't be subjected to.
Or maybe they're benefiting by losing some of those people. I don't know. And I have to also say that some of the people,
that's not why you want someone to leave your company, though. If there's someone there that you would be benefited by their departure, you should make that happen. It shouldn't be because of this reason.
I guess. Listen, it's up. Anybody can have that decide what they think is important or not. I do think that I don't know, again, how many people this affects. I really don't know. I don't know the scope and the scale of people feeling harassed to the point that they're going to report something. We all feel harassed during the day. We all deal with, other people in our lives that sometimes don't do or say things that we would appreciate them doing or saying. Sometimes, that's just humans living with humans. So I just don't know how big a problem this is, but apparently it's big enough that now, the EEOC has got to issue these rules and employers now have to comply.
All right. I hear your voice fading. I got one more quick one for you. You wrote a column for The Guardian about lying on expense reports. You wrote about an employee who was fired after initially claiming that he had consumed 2 sandwiches, 2 coffees, and 2 pasta dishes during a business trip to Amsterdam. Amsterdam. He later admitted that there was someone else there who had shared some of those meals, and that he had, not been honest.
But first he lied about it. He lied about it. He got caught out. And this was in London. The guy got caught out. Like, you had 2 sandwiches and 2 drinks and 2. Yep. I did. And then, they investigated further and it turned out he was lying. So they fired him. And the guy worked for, I forget, a bank or financial, Citibank actually is where he worked for. So they fired the guy. The guy contested it to some employee Bureau of Courts or something in London, God knows. And they stood behind the employer that they were right to fire the guy,
What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, the guy lied on his expense report. I mean, am I wrong? I mean, like, is there like second chances here? Like, you have an employee and the employee lies. It's like, basically the employee is stealing from the company. So. Well,
what was the crime? Was the crime having the extra? I mean, I think he claimed that he was within the limits of the spending, so it shouldn't have been a problem.
Okay, I'll throw this.
But what's the real crime here? Is it lying? Is it, misreporting your expenses, or is it lying about it?
Both. It's both. I mean, misreporting the expenses, of course, is you're stealing from the company. I mean, I don't care if it's under the amount or not. That's completely irrelevant. If you didn't, if you're charging the company through for 2 sandwiches and one of them was not for an employee or had nothing to do with work, then you're stealing from the company. And then you lied about it. And you work for a bank of all places where you're supposed to be, well, whatever. So, I mean, don't you agree? Am I wrong on that?
No, actually, I was surprised because you kind of suggested that this was a tough one. Yeah. The way you're describing it now, it doesn't sound like.
No, where the moral ground, the morality of expense reports fascinates me because, everybody fudges expense reports to some extent, and because a lot of this is left up to people aren't trained enough on expense reports. The policies themselves are not so clear. So that could certainly be that guy's defense. Although,
and sometimes I've worked at places where it's just been really hard to file for it. It's just a total pain. Yeah. I think the technology's gotten better. But especially going back a few decades, it's just an awful process to have to go through, and that doesn't help.
Even today, I mean, people, they claim certain extra points. Did they really tip the housekeeping staff $50 in cash, which has no receipt to it? Did they really do that? Or did they really need to upgrade to the BMW when a Honda Accord could have done fine? You know what I mean? And then what do you do about drinks at dinner? I mean, unless it's really clear, can I charge through those couple of old fashions that I had at dinner, or is that going? People play around with these different things. And it's sort of a messy area, for a lot of companies. But lying on it is really, it's pretty unethical, so.
I think, you asked about, does anybody deserve a second chance or a warning? I think that's a good question.
They do. And remember, in the end, I got the article here in front of me. So let me point out to you, my friend Lauren, at the very end, I say, in the end, dishonesty is dishonesty and business is built on trust. So yes, even though it takes some thought, I probably would have fired him too. So there. Of course, I said.
What's the headline on the piece, Gene?
Well, actually, I didn't set that headline. It was my editor.
What's the headline on the piece, Gene?
The gray moral ground of lying on expense travel.
I rest my case.
Fair enough.
Are you working on anything we should watch for, Gene? What are you going to be outraged about this week?
Oh, I don't know yet. I have not figured out. I'm working on a piece for the Inquirer next week about just a local about Hispanic businesses in Philadelphia and their growth and the support that they can get. But I haven't figured out what I'm going to write for The Guardian yet. And that's usually my fun, the fun stuff that I write. So we'll talk about that next week.
Sounds good to me. Gene Marks is a CPA who writes weekly on small business for The Guardian, The Hill, The Philadelphia Inquirer, The Washington Times, The Chicago Daily Herald, Forbes, and Entrepreneur. You can hear him on ABC Radio's Eye on the World with John Batchelor. Gene hosts 2 small business podcasts with Paychex Corporation and The Hartford. This episode was brought to you by The Great Game of Business, which helps businesses use an open book management system to help build healthier companies. You can learn more at greatgame.com. Gene, I always appreciate your doing this, but especially today with your voice fading. Thank you for hanging in there.
Thank you, Lauren. It was fun. Thank you so much.
Have a great week, everybody.